It looks like we're getting started. I want to be real. There we go. We're where we're supposed to be. And I apologize. I know I'm starting about 8 minutes late. And so if you were waiting and wondering what's going on, that's the problem. To be honest, I was working in my office and got kind of sidetracked. You know what? I'm looking at that video. Let me see something here. You know, pardon me a minute. I'll be right back in camera. I think this will work just fine. I've been sitting the last few times. Why don't I do what I'm used to doing? Having a lectern to work with. All righty. Ordinarily, at this point in the semester, right after spring break, I start off the class by saying something on the order of, it's good to get back to normal, noting how being away from campus or being out of the cycle has sort of thrown everything a curve. But I can't do that tonight because we don't have normal anymore. At least, well, according to the news media, we have a new normal, which sounds to me like abnormal, but that's the way it is. We will be looking tonight at the rest of Exodus 21, and we'll talk about some of the things that are there. Let me just tell you the homework and the web page I just set up or sent out, and there's some things that are loose. There'll be coming some more homework. Translating Psalm 51, I'll have some guidance for you on that, and assignment to help you get through that. Start on Psalm 51, I should say. And also we'll have another vocabulary quiz. They're not posted. The other things, however, are posted at the moment. And I think this week I'll try something really creative and new. I will give you a way to submit your work. So I did open up a channel for the work to come in. I apologize for that last week. But I appreciate both of you for being smart enough to figure out how to do it. To send me, at least one of you attached it to an email. It may be that I opened it up in the seminary level class. I don't know. Oh, and by the way, I just said it. It's the Bible college class. If you right now look, it won't be there. I will transfer it over to the from the seminary course, what I've got so far during a break tonight. All right. Exodus 21 is in front of me. I have the two of you somewhere out there. I don't know if either of you have returned to campus or were still on campus or have gone home and are staying there, but I have not gotten word that either of you have left the course, so I'm assuming you're with me. I've gotten homework from each of you and emails from each of you. So we're going to go ahead and get started with a word of prayer. And prayer is, of course, not only what we need for this class, but we need basically for every class. Just suddenly realized something I'm going to want to do, have that thing up and running in a minute. So let's do it that way. Let's pray, shall we? Father, you know all of our needs. But more importantly, we know you. We know you are the great God who runs the universe, who created it, who is in control of history and is working all history out to fulfill your purpose and your plan. And although we're utterly incapable of figuring out what you're doing, we do have the assurance of your word that you have a purpose for all, and that all things will ultimately work out according to your will and for your glory. Lord, we are living in somewhat troubling times. Scary times for some, frightening, terrifying times for a few people. Well, I guess not just a few, for many people. I pray, Lord, that would never be us. Never be me, never be the students in this class, never be the students on this campus, and certainly not the faculty and staff. Help us to be wise, to take the precautions that we can to protect ourselves from the infections. that COVID-19 infection that's out there. But Lord, help us to, in all of our wise activities, never to operate out of fear, but to operate with absolute confidence that you're on the job, that you're going to take care of everything. We do pray for those. I think particularly of one Calvary graduate, one couple that graduated from Calvary back in the 1980s. That are now serving as missionaries in northern Italy, right in the center of the COVID-19 outbreak there in Italy. We pray that you will protect them, Lord, and their church. Help them to be not just safe, but active, and to help them to be able to continue to minister to the needs not only of the church, but to their neighborhood and to those who are around them in this terribly difficult time. Help them to have peace and confidence, a peace and confidence that cannot be explained any other way than by the grace that they have in Jesus Christ. In short, Lord, I pray that you'll use this crisis time in Italy as a means to help their ministry, help them to reach out to the needy in their community, and I'm thinking spiritually needy here primarily, those who need Jesus Christ, and show them that there is a difference which comes from having Jesus Christ as your Savior. But of course, that's not just a prayer for missionaries in one long, remote area. Lord, if I look at the Calvary students we have online, I discover that we have students pretty much all over the globe. And in a very strange way, we are all in the same boat. Everyone is having to deal with COVID-19. And I pray, Lord, that everyone will walk boldly before you. Not foolhardy, not ridiculously, basically daring you to do them, not taking your grace for granted, but not running and hiding when the opportunity comes to minister. We pray that in all things, Lord, you will get glory through our lives and through this terrible virus which is spreading around the globe. We have no idea of how many things you're going to accomplish and what they are through allowing this, but we know that you will. Well, Lord, help me now and my students to get back to the reason we're here. To study your word and to study it in the original language. I pray that you would be with both of them. As they do their homework, as they do their reading, I pray that they will not just get good grades, and I certainly would hope to see that, but I pray that they will get deeper insight into your word. They begin to see the benefit that comes from knowing that they're seeing the text as close as we can get it straight from the mouth of the author himself, the human author, and of course you. Help me tonight to be clear and stay on focus, not be distracted by the various issues that have come up recently here on campus and in my life to make this a more difficult process than it used to be. Pray all this, Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, we're looking at law. And we talked last time, I believe it was, or maybe it was the time before, about the two different kinds of law. There's, it was last time actually, there is apodictic law, thou shalt not. But we're looking at casuistic or case law. And I want to translate. I want to start by translating, and then I want to go back inductively. I better bring this up and set it going, because if I don't, I want to go from, yes, current slide, and I want to go to there. Otherwise, you'll be watching me, and every gesture I make will be 7 to 10 seconds later on the screen. It becomes quite a distraction. But I want to go, as I was saying, I want to go through the rest of Exodus 21, just translating and reading as we go, pointing out some things possibly from time to time. And then I'll go back and I'll take up on some of these things. Now what you'll notice here, I should say on your screen at home, is I've underlined various portions. I have underlined the major or general laws, the conditions for those general laws, the laws that begin with key with a solid line, a heavy solid line. The secondary laws, the modifications and adjustments, they're underlined by two small, underlined by two parallel lines that are not very thick. Let me do this. Let's see, is this working now? I think it is, as I recall. Certainly makes it easier if it does. When we go on, we'll find this. What we have here, I have put these situations where the author, Moses, uses an alternative. We have the Hebrew word o, which is or. And when it's doubled, it means whether or not, or whichever, this or that. But the point is, when we look at that, we'll see that they are, and I've underlined those clauses with a single but thin line. And we'll have three of those to look at tonight, but let's go back to where we're supposed to be. Verse 22 is where I'm starting. It seems like that's about where we finish, and if it isn't, it's close enough. Because you're not here. Let's put it this way. Anyone not want me to start in verse 22? If you're screaming, I can't hear you. So here's where we're going to go. We'll start in verse 22. All right. The only problem I have is trying to read this thing down the line here. Waki yinatsu to get it out there. Ki yinatsu anashim wanagpu it would be isha hara what wayatsu Yaladeha walo yeye ason. Now there's our first condition. That's the circumstances, the case that the law is going to apply to. And it's very simple. It says, and if, given this situation, and if men struggle, and a man, I think the word I have here, just simple, means to strike, yeah. And a man strikes, and they strike a pregnant woman. And her children come out. But, I'm saying but because we have a wallow. This is all what does happen. Here's what doesn't happen. But there is not any harm, presumably, to the baby or babies. We have a plural there, yaladeha, which means children that are born, from the verb yalad. We don't have really any really good explanation of why the plural. It may be that it is used in generic sense, that whatever the birth issue comes out. Whatever it is, it's very clear what the situation is. We have babies born apparently as a consequence of the mother being hit, probably in the belly. The men are fighting, and somehow the woman is caught in the middle of it, and she gets a punch. Interesting, it doesn't say anything about which man punched her. The law is not concerned. The law deals with the situation, and doesn't try to sort out the blame. It says if they're both fighting, they're both part of the process. All right, so what are we going to do in this situation? Well, the general rule is Anosh, Yetzanesh, Ka'asher, Yashit allow Baal Ha'isha Wanatan Bet Palilim. Palilim. Get it out here. All right. She punched a woman and her baby is born. A pregnant woman and her baby is born. It says he shall, notice, Anosh Ye Anesh. Here we have the Cal infinitive absolute, and here we have the difnal imperfect. Now we have that situation where we have an infinitive absolute before a verb, and particularly an imperfect verb. It's the one that thou shalt surely, that surely is the idea, and that's what we're having here. And anosh, or anash, I guess I should say, means to fine someone or penalize someone. In this case, it's almost certainly a financial fine. It says, he, notice, third person masculine singular, apparently the person who delivered the blow, will be fined, will surely be fined. Now, I think what we've got to see in the law, when we're in history and it says, like thou shalt surely die in Genesis 2, or that's stating what will happen. We're now in a different genre, a different kind of literature, and when it says it says ye shall surely be fined, the idea here is this is not an optional thing. This is not, oh, well, you have a choice. He says there is no choice here. Here's the rule, and you have to live with it. Sometimes, as we'll see later, there is an option. But in this case, there's not, and that surely establishes that. So if you want, this infinitive has the idea of, fining, he shall be fined, or surely he shall be fined, asher, according to, and the ka is a preposition, and the asher introduces the clause that really covers virtually the rest of the verse, the rest of the law. He shall be fined according to that which the husband of the woman shall impose upon him. And he shall give or provide or pay bapilim. Here, what the judges establish is the idea here. He shall pay in the judges, or pay by the judges. That is in accordance with what the judges say. Two different prepositions, ka and ba here, but they're used to express similar ideas in this case. English, we might end up translating the same. I'm sure there's not quite the same meaning to them. This has the idea of instrument. This has the idea of resemblance or similarity or measurement. So the amount is established by the husband, and the imposition of that on the man should be by the judges. In other words, the man say, look, you injured my wife. And notice, this is a recognition that not every injury will be the same. Sometimes in the middle of this fight, you bump her and the baby's born. Well, she was about to give birth and she doesn't have a bruise, she doesn't have any injuries, the baby's fine, it just happened at that time. Well, you still have to pay. But if that woman is bruised and injured in the fight, and although the baby is born without any harm, then the price will be higher. And it will be the husband who has the right to decide that, because he's the one that's, in a sense, been victimized. Remember, in ancient Israel, though they say, oh, the wife was just a piece of property. No, she was not. But the role of the wife was much more neatly defined than it is in our culture, more clearly and specifically defined. She was responsible for caring for the house, and it was the primary one to take care of the day-to-day cares of the children, while her husband went out and worked in the field or worked somewhere else and made money for the family. And sometimes the wife would work in the field too, but when it came down to it, if one of them had to stay home, it was going to be the wife. So if she's injured and can't work, she can't take care of the kids, then the husband is stuck with two options. He has to hire a servant girl and pay her, so he's losing money because of this man. It'll cost him money because of the injury the man caused, or he has the option of staying home and just not getting paid. Or perhaps, if he has his own farm, neglecting his farm at the risk of losing his crop. So this law is written with a certain looseness to the penalty based on recognizing the fact that there's going to be differences from situation to situation. And it's interesting. The husband has the right to set the amount, but that amount will be imposed by the judges, which tells me if the husband gets greedy and start to say, my wife has a bruise on her right arm, I think you owe me $1 million. The judge can say, you're out of your mind. Your wife's bruise isn't worth near that much. And so the husband gets to weigh in, but the final say is the judge. So it's a pretty neat system. Neat in the sense it's nice and tight, clear, explainable. But there are situations which vary. Now this was all premised on V'lo yiyeh ason. But look at verse 23. V'im ason yiyeh. Now the condition is everything else is the same, but this is different. Instead of there is no harm, what if there was harm? Now we aren't told what the harm would be, but it seems to have been, well, we'll see as we go along. It seems that we're talking about miscarriage. The baby is lost, and that is a huge loss for the family. Not only emotionally, but even financially in the ancient world, where children were part of the workforce for their families. All right, so but if there is harm, وَنَثَّتَ nefesh tachat nefesh. He shall give life for life, ayin tachat ayin, shem tachat shem, yad tachat yod, regel tachat regel. He shall give life for life, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, hand for a hand, foot for a foot. The point seems to be, this is the famous lex talionis here, and it's, this is all about how this is that cruel law. But it isn't a cruel law. It's a merciful law. What this is establishing is a fundamental principle in Jewish law, in biblical law, which tells me something about my God, and that is the punishment fits the crime, or the injury in this case. If you take someone's life, then your life is forfeit. Why? To balance the books. Justice has to be done. Someone loses their eye. I don't think, and we have no evidence that ever in history did they have the policy of, you poked out his eye, so I'll poke out your eye. But rather, there would be an assessment to figure out how much the eye was worth. So this man, how much does he need that eye? And how much longer do you think he'll live? And they would figure it out. And the same thing, tooth for tooth, hand for hand. The Lord's point here is that justice should be limited. You see, we think, because we live in a time when, we don't want to do that, be that severe. But in the time of Moses, and thereafter even, a little fellow by the name of Hammurabi in Babylon, later in the time of the judges, he had a very interesting set of laws. And in his, it's, you knock out my tooth, I have the right to kill you. And not only that, I have the right to kill your wife and your children if you are of a lower class. And here the Lord says, notice, one rule for all, It doesn't matter whether you're a slave. Well, it does matter if you're a slave. We'll get that in a minute. But it doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor, male or female, an adult or a child. The rule is 1 for 1. Everything is limited to the crime determines how serious the punishment is allowed to be. And I shouldn't even call it a crime. And these aren't really exactly criminal activities. These are more what we call civil. But anyway, we'll move on. We got to verse 25. He says, Ki wiya tachat ki wiya. I should have gotten this earlier. Potsack tachat potsack or Potsack. Habura tachat habura. As it says, that is burned. And it's interesting. There's been a change. It's one of the reasons they changed the verse here. Is here we have life for life, then we have body part for body part. Now we have injury for injury, a burn for a burn, a wound for a wound, a stripe for a stripe. Now, the words Potsack and bura, or habura, it's a hate there, and habura, they have a lot of overlapping meaning. Habura normally refers to something where someone has hit you and leaves a big welt on your face, or cuts open a long strip. Where the word Potsack is, or Potsack here, is more or less a generic word for wounds. But the idea is, I can't kill because you hurt me. If you think back, I'm teaching Genesis right now, and just before spring break, I went through the descendants of Cain and Lamech, particularly, and Lamech kills a man for hurting me. And the answer is, Lamech, if you're still walking around, you don't have the right to kill. Unless somebody has died, there can't be an execution. At least in light of this. So the basic principle here is, let the punishment fit the crime. And that takes us to the end. Notice we have, this is a little something that they mark. This is what's called a closed paragraph marker. There's a technical term for it, but I'm not going to, it begins with s, but I'm not going to worry you with that. Just notice that when you see it, this means that the scribes over the centuries have decided that this is the end of a section. And we were saying, all right, from verse 22 to verse 24, we've been talking about this general law that deals with the injuries that can come when men fight, injuries to a woman, a pregnant woman. And when we get to the end of it, we have this to mark it. But notice, why'd they put this here? By the way, this is called a closed paragraph because as they wrote the text, they would come at this point. Originally, they didn't put a samach there. They put a space. About a third of the line would be left open without anything written there. Say this is the, we indent, they just left it blank. Now they also had a phone call that was an open, and we'll see one of those before we're done. They have an open paragraph marker, and with it you would end the line here and start, and everything would be clear to the end of the line, and then you would begin on a new line. And that's the end of a bigger section. These are not inspired, but they're often useful. But notice, there's a reason why they decided this is where the break should be. Waki. In between we have a wa'im. But that means that wa'im is part of a bigger issue. If you will, if I can use the term, the discourse, the legal section, is 3 verses long. 4 verses long. 22, 23, 24, and 25. And it has, the first verse states the general principle, and the rest of it deals with the, well, verse 23 then deals with the alternative situation when there has been damage to the child. And then verses 24 through 25 establish the basic guidelines for judges in determining what is the appropriate response for damages, or counterpoint for damages, or for punishment. All right, verse 26. Here we go. Waki yakeh ish et ayin abdo o et ayin amato wa shich chataha. And if a man strikes, smites, if you like King James, the eye of his servant, male servant, or the eye of his female servant, and here's the little important condition here, second condition, and he destroys it. That is, in punching somebody out, he makes them blind in that eye. Or perhaps damages it so badly that they may have some light getting in, but they can't really use it properly. That's the issue. All right. What's the rule on that? He says, well, the rule is simple. Lahat shit yish lechenu tachat enau. This is probably the simplest translation is to freedom is the idea of it is free, that's the state, a state of free. Free, no longer a slave. He, the master, shall send him, the slave, or presumably, or her too, out. Why? On account of his eye. In other words, you wounded him, he just paid for his freedom. Now this has a double benefit to it, this particular law. It's kind of a fun, interesting law to look at because on the one hand, it's straightforward. All right, somebody gets injured. And in fact, let's go on and look at the next one. You'll see the same thing. This is verse 27. And yeah. Wa'im shein abdo, o shein amato yafil. There you go. Or, and if it is the tooth of his manservant or the tooth of his maidservant that he knocks out. Notice it's causes to fall out. It causes to fall. This is it's not quite clear because of the lines here, but this is a hifil from the verb nafal. So he causes the tooth to fall out. He says, well, if that's true, he gets angry and he hits his maidservant or he hits a manservant and knocks his tooth out. Free, he should go out on account of his tooth. And so by those two laws, we get it. The law is about what is about justice, and how do we handle the justice here? And the answer is simple and pretty straightforward in terms of these particular commandments. It's okay, you injure your servant, your slave, then he no longer is your slave. He leaves free without any obligation or debt to you. And traditionally, the Jews interpreted that when a man, you may remember we saw when you let a slave go, when he's finished up his term, you are to send him out with money and send him off so he can go. Presumably that same thing here. It says it's just like he's finished his 6 years and now you pay and send him away. And so that is it says basically that an injury to a slave is of the same value as the slave's freedom, and that establishes justice. But it does something else too, which is perhaps more significant. It gives the slave owner every reason to be kind to his slave. If the slave owner starts says, "Hey, he's my slave, I can do anything I want to with him." And he starts losing these slaves. A slave was a costly item. In ancient, I've mentioned several times that there have only been in several classes over the decades that I've been here at Calvary, that there have only been two great slave societies that are of any connection to us in the West. I won't talk about China, Japan, and India and so forth. I don't know about what things are like there, or Africa for that matter either. But I do know that there's only been two great slave societies. One of them was the Greco-Roman culture of about the time of the Apostle Paul, from about 100 to 200 years before Paul to about 300 to 400 years after Paul. And the other, of course, was the American Old South. Israel had slaves, and we have laws about slaves, but they didn't have many slaves. And the reason was very simple. It wasn't economical. It wasn't economically logical to have a slave. You see, you have a slave, you have to feed him all year round. You have to clothe him, he's your responsibility. You have to provide him with a place to stay and keep him safe and healthy and in good shape so he can do work for you. Because if he gets sick, he's still your responsibility, he just isn't able to work. On the other hand, in Rome, they used slaves to do all the labor on the farms. And of course, the reason that while there was slavery in all of the American states originally, or all the American colonies originally, it only hung around in the South because they were growing on plantations. And the big thing is they were growing cotton and tobacco for that matter, and neither of those both of those crops were crops where you needed somebody to go out and pick. With cotton, until very, very recently, there was no way to get the cotton out of the field except with somebody's fingers pulling it loose from the cotton boll. Not the football game, but the thing that holds the cotton. And so somebody had to go do that. And so you have all these hundreds of slaves out there working in your field, and that is economically profitable because basically the slaves were machines. Same thing in the old ancient Rome. That never was true in Israel because they didn't grow that kind of crops. They were on hilly country and everybody had their own little farms. And so, yes, you would need extra people to help you when the harvest came in. So you would hire them. That way you didn't have to worry about, it wasn't your job to feed them, to clothe them, to provide for their health and so forth, or their shelter. You only paid them for the time they worked. So these laws were not laws based on the fact that there's this huge slave society. As I said, slavery was accepted, slavery was practiced, but the laws were about establishing guidance to judges on how to understand what is just. How do I decide cases? I have to weigh the evidence and not only come up with a conclusion, but often have to decide what is the appropriate punishment or the appropriate fine or the appropriate recompense that you have to pay. And so the Lord is giving this guidance here in the law. All right. We got through verse 27, and notice, there it is. I want to point here, but I've discovered there is a way to make my pointer work on the slide, but I don't know what it is yet, and I'm not sure whether it'll work. I'll study and see if I can, because it would be wonderful if I could circle and underline with my pointer here, and I'll see what I can do in the future to make it better. But right now, just notice we have this pet. Pet is for open. This is an open paragraph, and I just ended it and let it run all the way across, which is what the Jews would have done. I've been breaking these up into the individual laws. And notice we're starting, and so what we say, okay, there was a sense in which everything from, well, where would it be? Where was the last pet? I have to look and see. Yeah, we're going to go all the way back to the middle of chapter, or see, we're in 21. I'm going the wrong way. Yeah. Chapter 20, verse 28. So everything from verse 20, chapter 20, verse 29, on through. No, it's still 20. I'm in the wrong place. There we go. Let me see. Somehow this is turned to the wrong page. That's why. All right. There's my pe in verse 27. Yes. And the previous pe, yes, was the very end of chapter 20. So everything, these are the judgments, in chapter 21, verse 1. From there all the way to this point, the end of verse 27 was considered to be somehow one extended section. And you would, as an exegete, you would want to go through there and say, okay, what is it that they saw that said that all of these things were about the same thing? But I said I was just going to translate. Let me do one more proverb and one more legal case here, and which should take us to the end of verse 30, and then we'll take a break, okay? So we're kind of got a late start. Waki yedach shor et ish o et isha wamet sakol yisakel has shor walo ye akel et basharo u baal hashor naki. All right, let's see here. If an ox or bull, the difference between an ox and a bull is the same thing as the difference between a, what's the word I want? Not a heifer, anyway, beef cattle. He'd been surgically altered to make him, beef cattle are surgically altered to make them the meat more tender. Bulls were surgically altered to make them more tame, but they were still bulls, and they were big, strong animals, and they had different personalities. And it says, if an ox, and this is probably an ox, they didn't eat beef much. If they ate meat at all, it was going to be goat or sheep, unless they were something they hunted, like deer. But other than that, they ate, most of the diet of Israel was vegetables, but they had a lot of oxen, because oxen were the tractors of the ancient world. They were big and strong, and they could pull a plow. And remember, we're dealing with bronze plows that weren't they weren't polished smooth, and they weren't all that strong. And if they hit a rock, they would bend. And so it was nice to have a big, strong animal just rip it right through the ground for you, or carry a wagon load full of your produce at the end of the harvest season. And so it says, if an ox gores a man or a woman, and that person dies, it's the masculine thing, and he dies, but the he here is obviously got to be referring to either one of these people, and he dies, sakol ya sakeo, surely he shall be stoned. The ox, and here's the subject, sakol ya sakol ha shor, surely the ox shall be stoned to death, and his meat may not be eaten. It's interesting. Back in Genesis chapter 9, when God gave man the right to eat meat, he made the comment that man's blood, he who sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. He has the right to punish. But he also says, I will require the blood of every man that's killed from the hand of the man and from the hand of every beast. In other words, if an animal kills a man, that animal must die. Because even though the animal, or we call them dumb animals because they don't talk, but they're also not the brightest things in the world. The animals don't live by human laws. They don't know what they're doing. They just act by instinct. Well, that's just their nature. And God says, it doesn't matter. They killed a human being, and a human being is in my image. Therefore, if an ox gores a man or a woman to death, the circumstance is irrelevant. That ox dies. And he dies by stoning. You would take the ox and take it down into a little pit or valley, a narrow place so the ox couldn't get away, tie it down, and then people pick up, and we see people stoning, they think of this. Basically stoning, you pick up stones, and you throw them, and you just hitting that ox with stones until it's covered up and killed. That's how murderers were executed in Israel. And the ox was treated as a murderer. And notice, and the result was, even though that ox is beef, and you can eat beef, that's something the Lord is allowed in Leviticus chapter 11. And they say, oh, well, we'll kill the ox and then we'll all share the beef. No, you won't. Because no one is going to be benefited by a crime. Wait a minute. There's like a principle behind this, isn't there? No one should profit from a crime. Even the man who owns the ox can't get the thing out. And he says, but the owner of the ox is innocent. He is not to be charged. There's no crime. An ox just is an ox, and if it decides to, and it ends up stabbing somebody in the gut and that person dies, then the ox has to die, and the owner is lost the ox. He gets no recompense for it, and the ox is destroyed, and he doesn't even get the meat to eat or sell. But but here's our alternative. Wa'im shor nakach hu mithmol shalosh wahu ad balaya I get it here. Bav alau. I get it out. Somehow my mouth won't work tonight. Well, lo yishma renu wahemim ish or isha. So this we got a long condition. Let's get it here. But if the song, now this is an adjective from the verb. This verb nagach it looks like a verb actually, but it's not. Remember, it would be a comma patak. This is an adjective, nagach. Nagach actually would be probably a better way to pronounce it to make that distinction. If the ox has been a goring ox, that's what this the ox who was characterized by goring in the past. I wrote in my translation, if the ox has been characteristically aggressive in the past. And it's an interesting statement. It says, it was yesterday 3 times. That is, literally it's the day before yesterday. That's the idea. The day before yesterday, which means in the past. That's how Hebrew says in the general past. It's the day before yesterday. Tomorrow, or yesterday, there it is. But 3, so it's actually 3 days before yesterday. It's a while back. So the point is the ox has a reputation. 3 days. And so the first thing is the ox has been aggressive in the past. That's one thing that has to be. There's a second thing. Wa hudah, and that's a hafal of the verb ud, I believe. Ayin Vav Dalet. And it's that is, this is to warning And this verb in the active form, this is the passive form, but in the active form, the direct object always has the preposition. And so in this, the preposition bait. So this would have been the direct object of this verb, but since it's in the passive, this direct object has become the subject. So we're going to say, and its owner, his owner, the ox's owner, had been warned. Number one, the ox had a reputation. That's the first condition for what's about to be said. Second condition, the owner knew it. He'd been warned that his ox was dangerous and was not behaving well. But there's a third condition. Lo yishmarenu, and he did not keep it. The nu on the end here is actually the third masculine saying something. He did not keep it. He did not guard it. He did not place it under arrest. He didn't confine it or take steps to protect it, however you want to word it. Doesn't neatly, smoothly come into English, but the idea is very clear. The ox had a reputation for goring. The owner knew about that. He had been warned about the danger of the ox, and he did nothing to stop it. And the man or the woman died. Actually, he killed. It says the ox killed the man or woman. So we have, in order for all this to work, we have to have all four of those things. The ox has to have a reputation. We already knew it was a danger. The owner was aware of it, and the owner did nothing about it. And the ox was the reason the person died. In other words, you can't kill an ox because it gored somebody who recovered. Now, why is this different? Hashor Yisakel, the ox shall be stoned, Nithal. Wagam, and the gam says, hey, take a notice here. Wagam ba'alau yumad. The ox shall be stoned, and also its owner shall be executed. The form here, hafel, or kal. I guess it's actually no. It's a hafel of the verb mot, to die. Should be and the master shall be caused to die. That's the way that the Jews refer to execution. Master and the owner should be executed. Why? Because it turns out, if you know that there's a danger that could hurt or kill somebody else, and you are in position to fix that, and you don't, then it's the same as if you actively murdered them. That's the Old Testament law. Notice what we're seeing here, how incredibly valuable human life is. If an animal kills a man, the animal has to die. Not because we're trying to prevent the animal from doing it again, but because the animal has killed a human being. And human beings are the most precious things on this planet. And if that animal was a threat to humans and everybody knew it, and the master and the owner, I keep saying master because Baal is often used for a slave master, and the owner took no steps to prevent it, to control it, to stop it, and the animal still goes out and kills someone, then it's as if the master sent it out to kill. And he is executed as a murderer. I only mention this because it seems that more and more in our culture, for all the nice words that people are saying, the value of human life is cheapened. We don't treat people as important anymore, as valuable. All right, there's a secondary command here, a secondary law built off of this one, and it says im kofer yushat allow So what's the variant here? And this is an interesting one. This is dealing specifically with this last little phrase. And his master shall be executed. His owner shall be executed. He says, now, if a price, a payment, a life payment is established on you, how did I word it here? Yeah, this is if a payment is imposed on him. That's probably a better way to put it. If a payment is imposed on him, what's he saying? He's saying it's possible. Here again, the judge can have the final say here. It's you can the life the oxygen, but the judge can grant you the right, can allow the person to buy his way out of the execution, to pay a fine, presumably to the family that lost their loved one. And again, this suggests that what we're talking about is looking at the very specific situation, saying, maybe what we're saying is not that he didn't do anything, but that he was his measures were inadequate. He should have known to do more. Is that as bad as somebody who totally was reckless and didn't care? And so the judge gets to make that call, and he says, but if he does, then the person has to pay whatever. Wenatan pidyon nafsho kakol asher yushat allow. And there's a yushat allow again. Imposed upon him. It says, if he is granted, if he is given a price for his life, then he will give, and they changed the verb here, or the noun here, to the word ransom for his life. It's interesting. It says like you're being held hostage on death row. And you can buy your way out in certain circumstances if the situation warrants it. And he'll pay whatever the ransom for his life is according to all that is imposed upon him. In other words, you say, well, I'm a poor man. Doesn't matter. What you did was terrible. You owe $50,000. So if you can't come up with $50,000, you're executed. Life matters, even when accidents happen. All right, I said we take a break, and we will. Let's take 10 minutes. We'll come back then at about 7:15, right? And then I'll finish the translation, and we'll then go back and look at the various grammatical and syntactical issues that might be very useful for you. Thank you very much. Let me give you a break now. Thank you. Bye. And we're back. And we just finished verse 30. And you might notice this doesn't end with a pet or a summit because we're really not done yet. We come to verse 31. We still continue this same general topic, which is the goring of an ox or things like it. Let's see if we can, where did I put it? I should have a controller. There it is. All right, here we have that construction I told you was coming. Obein, Yegach, pardon me. Now what that literally says, or a son he gored, or bat Yegach, or a daughter he gored. Now we would say the first thing is we're going to do that O here. O. Or is another way of saying either or in most cases. In this case, I think we're almost necessarily, in English, have to say whether or. Whether he gored a son or gored a daughter, and the son and daughter tell us two things. Number one, there's no difference between male and female. But it also seems to say that this could refer to any youngster. They're out in the field and they're walking by and the ox doesn't like him there and he gives him a shot with his horns and kills him. It could be a grown-up, could be a youngster, son or daughter, doesn't matter. Kamishpat hazeh ye'aseh lo. According to this judgment, it shall be done to him. Nifal here, ye'aseh. It shall be done to him. In other words, what is the judgment? The ox, or done to it, if you will, because we're talking about the ox. If the ox has no record or reputation for goring people and it kills a child, according to this rule, you kill the ox. It kills a son, it kills a daughter, doesn't matter. Daughter, son, equal. On the other hand, if the owner knew that the ox was prone to goring people, and he didn't do anything to stop it, and the ox killed your son or your daughter, then the rule is the ox dies, and so does the owner is executed. So this is, you got to see, the law is not, when it says according to this law, it's everything that's gone on about the goring issue here. Now look at verse 32. We have another subcategory here. Im eved yegach hashor, or ima, and we'll come back to this, but notice the word order is very interesting. We'll talk about this in a minute. If a servant the ox gores, or a male servant the ox gores, or a female servant, kesef shaloshim shakalim yitain la adonao wahashor yisakeo. Please watch this carefully, because people often misread this and misinterpret this passage. It says, if a servant or a male servant the ox gores, or a female servant, then, and presumably, and kills, because of what comes next, then silver, kesef, money, 30 pieces of silver, which is the price of a slave in ancient world. 30 pieces of silver, there's a 30 shekels of silver, that's a weight, shekalim, will be given to his owner, to his lord, his master, and the ox will be stoned. And the fact the ox is stoned tells me we're dealing with death, the death of that slave. Now let's notice something here. This is not saying that, well, a slave is only worth money, and he's not a human being, he's just property. It's the other way around. It says if it happens to a free person, then the ox dies. That's it. If it happens to a slave, the ox dies. But the ox's actions didn't just affect the person who was killed. it also affected his master. He's out the value of his slave. And so the owner of the ox has to reimburse the master for the loss of his slave. But it's not saying that the slave is just property. It's saying the slave is a human being, but he is also property. And so there's an extra rule for this to maintain the status here. And now we have our our closed paragraph marker here. And we have Waki, another new section dealing with a new issue of some sort. Waki yipatach ish bor o ki yikare ish bor awalo yikasenu wanafal shama shor o chamor. So that's verse 33. It's all the condition here. And if a man opens a pit. Now, the idea is that there is already a pit there. And it's been covered up, boarded up or something. It's been made so that people won't fall through. Or animals either. He says if a man opens a pit, he opens the pit for some reason. Maybe he's digging a well and he covered it up and now he's gone back to work on it again, and at the end of the day, they left it open. It doesn't matter. If he opens up a pit, or, if is repeated again, if he if a man digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or a donkey falls into it, verse 34, Ba'al habor yishalem kesef yashiv leba'alau wahamet yeyelo. Then the owner of the bore, that is of the pit. So I think that's a real easy vocabulary word. How do you get a pit? Well, one way to do it is to bore a hole. So you got a hole, you bored it in. So bore is a hole that somebody has dug. And he says, and the owner of the hole, of the pit. And then we have this verb, shalam. And you notice this is a PL imperfect. Shall make whole. We are familiar with shalom from the Hebrew word the verb shalem, from the Hebrew word shalom, meaning peace. But this helps us understand the nature of peace, because the word shalom really comes from an adjective, or the adjective from shalom means complete or whole. Peace is when everything is as it ought to be. We've got it all together, as it were. And so when the hifil, to make whole, actually this has been adopted in the law, in American law, and British law too. If you sue somebody does, say, someone doesn't like the fact that you have a tree, doesn't like the tree that's growing on your property. And so while you were on spring break, you decided to go on a little vacation because you didn't get the word that we were in the middle of a pandemic, but you went off somewhere, and when you come back, you discovered that your neighbor had sneaked over and with his chainsaw and cut your tree down and cut it up and piled all the wood up and left. So you sue him because he had no right to cut your tree, which is true. Then you say, I'm suing him for $50,000. And the judge will say, no, you can't. Why? How much did the tree cost you? How long has it been there? And so forth. And you say, and you tell him, and he says, well, that's far less than $50,000. He says, but Your Honor, he shouldn't have done it. And the answer is, no. He says, the law says I must make you whole. That is, I must reimburse you what you were lost. And that's the idea, the sense here. He says, the owner of the whole shall fully reimburse with silver, with money, how do we'll do it? Shall make full compensation, because that's the end of the clause. And then it says, silver he shall return to the owner, to its owner, that is the ox's owner. Did I get that right? Did I lose something? Did something mess up? That looks strange. Yeah, I thought so. There should be a wow at the end of this right here. To the owner of it, there should be a wow on here. And they, the dead animal will belong to him. In other words, all right, you dug a pit, the animal falls into that pit, and it dies. All right. Or it's injured and you have to kill it. He says, so you have to buy him, either buy him a new animal or that's equivalent, or give him the money to buy a new animal. But when you do that, by giving him the money, that means you bought the bad animal, the one that was injured or killed. And then you can do whatever you want to do with it because it's your animal. And that's a principle in American jurisprudence too, stolen from Scripture. That you say something, well, you say, I want that. You say, okay, you have. I remember I've watched judge shows on television. Kind of get fascinated by them sometimes. Not the people, but the law. And they'll say things like, you know, okay, I bought this and it's no good, so I want him to return his money. And the guy says, so return the, you know, I bought this car and it's no good. Or no, I bought something else and it's no good. And he says, okay, so which do you want? The thing you bought, or do you want the money? If you want the money, you've got to return it to him because you can't take both. And that's the justice here. He says, okay, you cost him an ox or a donkey, so you reimburse him an ox or donkey, but the ox or donkey that he lost is now yours, and the original owner has no say about it. That's how the system worked. All right, let's try another one. Getting toward the end, there are only 37 verses, and there's the last page. So let's take a look. Now, let me see something before I do that. There it is. We finished a section. See the sonic there? All right, let's go on. We have two sections here, and actually that's not quite true. I'll explain when we get there, but let's take a look. Waki yegof, actually, shor ish et shor re'ehu, wa mate, and if a man's ox gored the ox of his friend or neighbor, and the neighboring ox dies, u makaru et hashor hachai. Well, let's start one at a time. Then they shall sell the living ox, wa hatsu et kaspo, and they shall divide the money, the kesef, the silver. They shall divide the sale price, whatever they received. Wa gam et hamet yechetsun, and also the dead animal they will divide. So what's happened is one ox kills another ox. And you say, okay, here's the way it works. You're out an ox, and I have an ox that's supposed to be picked. So here's the deal. We'll sell my ox. I'll take half, and you take half of the proceeds. The living ox. The dead ox, will butcher it, and you take half, and I take half. In other words, we will share the loss. Each person has an equal share in the loss. That's the law here. Except, or And this is saying, but on the other hand, there's another case here, and this almost has this, and I put it with a single line because it has the function almost like the word ki or the word im. It says, O nodak ki shor nagach hu mithmol shalashim. But if it's known that the ox is a gorer, is an aggressive ox, and has been known from 3 days before yesterday, 3 days ago, Walo yish marenu ba'alau, and his master didn't do anything to secure it, he didn't confine it, then Shalem Yashalem Shor Tachat Hashor. Then he shall surely fully pay another ox, for that ox. Wahamet lo. And the dead animal will become his. And that's it. He doesn't get a 50-50 shot. He has to pay for everything because he knew that could happen and he did nothing to stop it. Now what you see is all of these laws deal with very specific situations, but they also illustrate very general principles, which a judge could use in figuring out how do you discern what is just. Now we come to verse 37. We're obviously starting here. We have a Samach again. We come to the end of the thing. We come to verse 37, and we have the beginning of a new section. Ki yignov ish shor or she watabachu o makaro. There's the condition that's given. If a man steals an ox or a sheep and butchers it or sells it, chamisha bakar yashalem tachat hashor wa arba son tachat hashem. It goes 5 cows he will use as full payment. He will reimburse for the ox, and 4 sheep for the lamb. Now, what's interesting here is this doesn't end with a sum. If you have your Hebrew Bible in front of you, you look up and you say, okay, what's going on? Okay, I want to keep looking. 4 sheep you will have for sheep. Okay, we're going to go down here, and I'm at the end of verse 37, which is the end of the chapter, which, by the way, in our Hebrew Bible, it is the last verse of the chapter. In the English Bible, it will be the first verse of chapter 22. And chapter 22 will have one more verse than it shows in the Hebrew Bible. But what's going on here? Well, I keep going. I say, well, that verse doesn't have a samach. Verse 1 of chapter 22 doesn't have a samach afterwards. Verse 2 doesn't have a samach after it. Verse 3 has a samach after it. And if you were to go through and read and translate those, you'd discover something. They all deal with theft. Various aspects of of somebody stealing something. And so you say, the Jews were right. They put the samach here, and they went on. I'm not sure who came up with the chapter division, but they missed it. This is not the end of a thought. This is the first law in a new series of laws on dealing with stealing of things. All right, well, that's what we're looking at here. I want to go back now a little bit And one of the things I want to do is sort of do some inductive work. That is where we look at the text and say, okay, what's going on? One of the challenges that we all had, and I've marked it up so it's all marked there, is figuring out where does the condition end and the law begin. Let's see, I want to go back. Let's go back to, this would be what, verse 28, I guess. There we go. Here we have an interesting situation. We have to explain it. Et. Now we know from our Hebrew 1 class that the particle et can either be a preposition meaning with or a direct object marker with a definite object, with a definite direct object marker. So it says, let's see, could this be the preposition with, since it doesn't have a definite noun following it. And you say, ki yigakshor et ish. So you go, so. And if an ox gores with a man or with a woman, and the et here has the idea of accompanied by, in which case we would be saying, if an ox and a man together work together, or an ox and a woman work together to gore someone, it doesn't make any sense. It's clearly a direct object marker, a definite direct object marker, and yet the object is not listed as definite. Now this is the kind of things you run into several times in your studies. The rules of Hebrew grammar are not like the laws of science. They're flexible, and they have exceptions. But in this case, the fact that there's no definite article in front of either of these words is easily explainable because we're dealing with a specific situation. We're dealing, when this ox gores, he didn't just gore anybody. He gored one specific person, either a man or a woman. And the law, by using the et here, Moses is saying, look, I'm talking about a specific situation. One person got gored. Now, we don't know who that person is. It's not like this is a historical event. But it is still a definite noun in thought, but not in form. And so this is the kind of thing you run across sometimes, and as you're trying to apply the rules. I notice, especially when you get to second year Hebrew, you're going back and look at your Hebrew grammar, and you're trying to use all the rules, and suddenly the rules start not working as well as you thought they were. And here's a good example, and it's not a big deal. You can do it. It may very well be that when you translate, you didn't even notice it. But now I've pointed it out to you, so if you see it again, you'll know that that's the way it is. What makes a noun definite is not the fact that it deals with one specific individual or independent situation in fact. Definite means somehow or other it is presupposed in the context, or in the situation the context is dealing with. In this case, it's presupposed that the ox gored something. And it's a law about someone or something. You go, okay, so it's going to be the man, the woman that he gored. And that's true in Hebrew with the definite article. It's true in English. I pointed out, I don't know how many times in various classes, Hebrew and English classes too, that is English Bible classes, that when you see the definite article, it refers to what's the word I want? It means that the word is somehow already presupposed in the context. Notice how that works. When I was growing up, or I should put it, when I was in college, there was a professor who lived across the street from me. His name was Patrick Romanell. The professor, now notice, it's perfectly fine to say the professor now. My first time, I couldn't say the professor because it isn't presupposed that there would be a professor there. Somebody's got to be there, but wouldn't we suppose that there was a professor there? So I have to say, there was a professor living across from me. And then I identified the fact I'm talking about a professor, so I can use the pronoun he, I can use the definite article the when referring to him, as well as his own personal name. In the same situation here, and that's the way it normally occurs, in the situation here, it is the situation, not the context. Or maybe I shouldn't put it that way. It is not the textual context, what some grammarians call the cotext, but the circumstantial or situational context which determines it. This ox is going to gore something to death. So that is sort of built into the situation, is that there's a specific person involved. This is not about oxes that just gore. It's about oxes that gore, an ox that's goring an individual. And so that individual can be a man or a woman, and it's going to be identified with this definite marker. All right. Mostly just to say, look, don't jump to conclusions too much. Don't get too hyper when things don't go quite exactly as you expected them to. I mentioned this as I went by. Look at verse 31. Now we have this OO, which is a normal Hebrew construction that we haven't really run into. You might notice that sometimes the Hebrew vav is translated or, a son or daughter. Here we have O, and there's a subtle difference between them. This word means alternatives. When this ox gored, it gored either a son or a daughter. They were not interchangeable. Those are two different individuals. If I say something like, this is better, teaching Calvary is better than sons and daughters. I don't know what that means, but anyway, something is better than sons and daughters. And you say, in that case, I would not use O, I would use the vav. Better than sons and daughters. It's like it's better than having a son, it's better than having a daughter, it's better than having both. It doesn't matter. I am just identifying a category of people, and I'm saying that within that category there are various options. Here, that's not happening. I'm talking about individuals. So the O actually has a distinctive sense. Not that you'll have to worry about it most of the time, but I want you to point out that get used to the idea that these variant forms are not really interchangeable. They're not just two ways of saying the same thing. There are differences, even if we don't notice them and even if they don't directly affect our exegesis. Don't get used to saying that, because as soon as you say that, you'll start making mistakes in your exegesis, because you'll be taking your English translation as a guide to the meaning of the Hebrew rather than seeing what's really going on. And while lots of times it'll be 6 of one, half of the other, half a dozen of the other, as far as our English translation is going to be close enough, there are those times when making that assumption will get you well away from what the Hebrew text was really trying to say. But look at the other thing. The thing I really want you to notice is the word order. Whether son he gored or daughter he gored. Now notice, normally, everywhere else, let's go back and look at the previous condition that this is an adjunct to. He says, if the ox gores a man or a woman, you go, oh, it's man and woman come after goring. After the verb. So it's verb, subject, direct object. It's pretty much the Hebrew normal word order. But when we get to verse 31, it's direct object, verb. And object coming first is not. There are only a handful, literally less than 10 known languages on earth where it's normal to have the object come before the verb. It's almost universal in human language that it's verb then object, except for special reasons. And that's the first thing we say is, why did he rearrange the order? Why is it son he gored, daughter he gored, rather than whether he gored a son or a daughter? And the first thing you got to remember is by rearranging it like this, even in English we don't have any trouble with the meaning, it comes very smoothly and clearly into our brain. Yet if I translated it, if son he gored, if daughter he gored, or whether son he gored or daughter he gored, you will notice it and you will make certain adjustments in your thinking based on that change. Because the whole point of the rearrangement was to draw attention to this. And it's saying, okay, the issue is not the goring. The thing that is really crucial now is the object of that gore. Who got gored? And he says, it doesn't matter. Son or daughter, man or woman, doesn't matter. Now, in our previous example up here, what does matter is the goring. Look, if gored an ox, a man or a woman, you say, what's going on? He says, okay, you say, what's the relationship between the ox and the man and the woman? Well, he gored them. And that's the essence of the law. Now we're talking about an ox goring somebody, and now he wants to say, well, I want to make an adjustment to your thinking. I want to clarify something and make sure you get it. It doesn't matter whether it's a man or a woman. It doesn't matter whether it's a son or a daughter that he gored. So he puts those first to draw our attention. Now, this means you can start seeing that if you were to be, say, writing an exegetical paper or preparing an expository sermon or something, or working out some sort of theological point, and you want to treat verse 31 as its own law, then you've got it wrong. This is clearly, this word order tells me you have to know what came before to understand what's being said here, or to appreciate what's being said here. The same thing applies to verse 32. Look at that. This is an even more interesting word order. Im ebed yigach hashor o ama. If a servant gored the ox, or a male servant, or a female servant. But notice, he's put the verb and the subject between the two direct objects. This is really special. Marks it very much. And this again, in this case, I think it's important because not only is it we do have an im here, saying we're starting a new subcategory, but he's also saying, let's take a look at this subcategory. It's dealing with a very specific class of people, slaves. And he does it by putting the slave here, then putting the verb, and then putting the slave at the end, so that we have sort of a sense, I start my condition with slaves, I end my condition with slaves. You got it? It's all about slaves, male slaves, female slaves, and ox goring them. And how are you going to deal with that? And in the context, it would be the ox goring them to death, since the ox has to be executed, has to be stoned to death, according to the rest of the verse. And so it says, okay, there is a difference when it comes to slaves, and it has nothing to do with the ox. It has to do with the owner of the ox. He's going to have to cough up 30 pieces of silver, 30 shekels of silver, to pay for the loss, the owner of the slave, for the loss of the slave. I already mentioned that this changes in verse 37. Let me do one more thing and go back all the way to where we started in verse 32. I asked you this week, and I haven't graded your papers yet, so I can't tell you, I don't know how you dealt with it, but I asked you to kind of look at the verbs and how they were being used. But notice a pattern here. If imperfect. If imperfect. If imperfect. If imperfect. There's our verb. Way at the end. Here's a good word order thing for you too. If the tooth of his manservant or the tooth of his female servants he knocked out. So again, we're going to say he's focusing on the tooth. There we go. But it's imperfect. If imperfect. If let's see, if this is the condition. If the ox had, I know this isn't even a verb, this is the preface, this is an adjective, remember? If the ox was a goring ox, was aggressive in the past, and it was known, another participle, and imperfect, the master didn't do anything about it, didn't guard him, and he died, involved consecutive perfect. Then here, if imperfect. Imperfect after the O, because it's situation there. Imperfect after im. Key imperfect. That's all just the same one. Key imperfect. O. A passive participle, a nif-out participle, if it is known. So it's a stative situation. You know, if it is known, blah, 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 there's the imperfect, and he didn't guard him or didn't restrain him. He steals. He plus the imperfect. There's a pattern here. Now, be careful. I'm not saying, nor should you say, oh, in every process in the law, you need to have either, if it's an action that they're dealing with, you have imperfect, and if it's a state or a situation, a fact that you're dealing with, you'll have a verbless clause or a participle or a passive participle. That would be an improper generalization. What it does say, though, and you can do this with other, go through the other laws that are found in Exodus and Deuteronomy, where we have these if clauses. Whoops, we're going too far. Don't want to go all the way back to the beginning. Let's just go back to verse 22. Well, there's 22. Yeah. There's where we want to be. What we can say is that that's a normal response. And why is that? Because what's happening with that imperfect in each of these cases? If he does this, it's dealing with a hypothetical situation that can occur over and over and over again in different times, in different places, with different people involved. If I had a perfect, the tendency would be to read that as if this happened in the past, or this is something that it tends to boil it down to imply that it's somehow an event that's a one-time only thing. And this imperfect says, no, this is a situation that can occur over and over, can recur, let's just put it that way. It can happen again and again in different places, different times, different people. However, what's very interesting is look at, let's see, what was I wanting to look at here? I marked it here. Yeah. Look at verse 22. Here's our imperfect. If two men struggle, or if men struggle, it doesn't say two men, but it just says men, anashim. If men struggle, presumably it's two men fighting. But then I don't have an imperfect. I have a vav consecutive preterite. And they strike a pregnant woman, And here's another Vav consecutive preterite. Yatsa, Yatsu is the cow perfect of Yatsa, to go out. And her babies or her children go out. And you go, oh, what's going on here? If this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then I'm going to say, but not this, and now I don't have the Vav consecutive preterite. I don't have the Vav, the Vav consecutive perfect anymore. I have a simple imperfect, and it's the verb to be too. And there is no harm. So these are sequential. This happens first. The men are fighting. And then they end up hitting her. And then she has a miscarriage, or she delivers her baby. But there is no harm. See, this is a state of affairs. And he says, so it's changed. And you go, oh, I get it. And the same thing, let's see, I want some of these others, let's see. So what you're going to see is the Vav consecutive in a preterites here, Vav consecutive perfects in this are identifying what happens next, what happens next, what happens next. And then when they're interrupted, like this, they'll say, okay. And here I have a state. Well, if this state isn't true, if it isn't true that nothing happened, if there was some harm, then. And now let's take a look at the apodosis. We've seen the apodosis. Now, apodosis, these are the then clauses. And I have anosh ye atnesh. Surely he shall be fined. Imperfect. Here we have a Vav introducing the preterite, the apodosis. But if harm did occur, if there was harm, then Vav consecutive preterite. Then you shall give life for life, and the other things. And you go, oh, and it's interesting. The crime or the injury was a result of men fighting, and he shifts from the third person here to the second person. You shall give life for life. It seems that he's not talking to the man who punched the woman, or the men who punched the woman. He's talking to the judge. He says, here's how you'll handle it. And again, this has the idea of, given this situation, then this will happen. So the Vav consecutive preterite in this kind of literature, Vav consecutive perfect, I should say, in this kind of literature, which is often translated as a future tense in other passages of Scripture, here it will say, and then this you will do. It's instruction here. It's telling us how to do it. And he says, this is what you'll do. This is what you'll do. What we have here is a kind of literature, basically procedure. This is the procedure you'll follow, or this is the way you'll make your decision. The procedure you'll follow in making your decision. You'll look at these conditions, and then, given those conditions, then this happens. And it tells you the kinds of things you have to pay attention to. We have to look. We have to start with the basic condition. Men are fighting. So we've got a situation which is out of control. Fights are not orderly. Even professional prize fights with all the rules and everything else are not really neat and orderly. So we have a specific kind of situation. So you want to look at the kind of situation you're dealing with. And then you want to look at the specific action that took place. The woman, this pregnant woman, was hit. And then we look at the consequences of that action. Given this an a potentially dangerous situation, and an action occurs which is damaging to somebody, and that leads to consequences. He says, well, if the consequences are not severe, then it's a fine. If the consequences are severe, then it's something totally different. You see, you're learning, and I can apply that kind of thinking to other kinds of decisions I would make if I were a judge. And of course, to some extent, we can apply it ourselves to other situations when we talk about our own lives. All right, it's time for another break. We'll take another 10 minutes. That'll be 10 after 8. I know I'm kind of thing, and then I'll probably let you go a little early. We'll see. I tend to get long-winded at times, but I'll try to be nice. We'll talk a little about what's coming up next week. All right, thank you. See you in 10 minutes. And ready for the last half hour, 40 minutes, okay? Maybe not that long, we'll see. We're back. I think it's back to chapter 21, verses 28 and following is what I was going to look at here. Because I want you to notice verb forms in anticipation of what we'll be looking at next week. I already pointed out that in the conditional clauses we have a tendency to see imperfects. And if there's a sequence of events, it'll be an imperfect followed by VOV consecutive perfects. And here, verse 28 gives a simple example of this. And if an ox gores a man or a woman, and he dies, not the ox, but the man or woman, and the VOV consecutive perfect there for the word moot, or mot, to die. So, And then, this one gives us kind of an interesting mix of things. We can see the results can be various, but basically, when you're giving directions on action, you're going to see the action that is prescribed in the imperfect. Notice, surely he shall be stoned. Nifal imperfect. The ox shall be stoned, as I'll put him in there. And then I have a negative nifal, and he will not, and his flesh shall not be eaten. By the way, there's a good example of this same thing I was talking about. He ordinarily et would be with the direct object of the verb to eat. We will eat his flesh, and we'll have et because this is a definite noun phrase. His flesh, its flesh, the ox's flesh. But in this case, it's the subject of the verb ye'akel, but that's a passive verb, so it still has it there. His flesh will not be eaten, shall not be eaten. I tend to go shall for these to give that sense of it. So we have what we are to do, and then we're told what we're not to do, and both of those are imperfect. And then we have uva'al hashor naki. Now we have a simple, but the owner of the ox is innocent. He doesn't get punished. He doesn't get charged. And you go, So we have what we're to do, what we're not supposed to do, and what the situation is, how to interpret the situation. And so we say, all right, when I have an action that's being prescribed in Exodus 21, I'm going to see the imperfect. The same thing goes on with the next one. We have if the ox had a habit of goring, and we go on and on and on. The master didn't do it, and the owner didn't do anything about it, and the ox killed somebody, whether a man or woman. And then we have the ox shall be stoned. And also, by the way, the gams here are significant. We have two of them in this chapter. And the gam is, take notice of this. This is something more that you might be tempted to overlook. So I want you to notice this. And also, his master will be executed. And so he puts, normally the verb would come first, but in this case, he puts the subject first, the ox, and then the master. Why? Because that's the issue. It's not the stoning and the dying as much as who's going to do it. He says, now, so what I notice the ox will be stoned, but also his master will be executed. And when we speak it in English, that's the way we do it. And by the way, if you do scripture reading and you're preaching or teaching or something, and you read the scriptures to somebody, look at your Hebrew. It'll often tell you where you should be putting the emphasis in your verbal presentation. But the point is, in this particular type of literature, this kind of discourse, if I use the term that Longacre, the fellow whose theory I presented on the first class about holistic discourse analysis. He would identify this as instructional literature, that is, instruction giving people guidelines as to what to do in a certain situation. But next week we'll be looking at someone giving instruction, telling people what to do, or in this case, telling God what to do, and it's very different. Take a look at this. Here's next week, and I'll probably have a better Hebrew text for you. This is not my favorite font, and I tried to change it, and as soon as I did, it turned it into Arabic, so I just let it go. I just have to reload it. But anyway, let's start verses just to get the thing. Verses 1 and 2 are found in your English Bible, but they don't have a number. They're not considered verses. They're considered the superscription. And so verse 3 in the Hebrew text is verse 1 in your English text. That stuff, usually in italics above it, is right here. It's part of the Hebrew text. It goes back as far as we can go with our Hebrew Bible. We have found, so it's got a long history. We know it's not part of the original text. David didn't write it when he wrote this psalm. He didn't put this in here. But someone did relatively early. So early that we have no texts which start with verse 3. They all start with verse 1. All the Hebrew texts we have, even the Dead Sea Scrolls and so forth. All right. Le Manatseach Mizmor LaDavid. That is, for the director. Presumably, this is the director of the temple choir, or the temple musicians. Temple had singers and instrumentalists both. And it's apparently this was deposited in the temple for use in worship at some time or another. Some people have tried to come up with a specific time when it would be used. We don't have any way of knowing that. But for the choir director, let's say, or the music director, better, a psalm of David. Mizmor comes from the verb zamar, which means to strum a psaltery or a harp. A guitar probably would be the closest we have in our world. And so this was the psalm was a song that was sung to the accompaniment of a stringed instrument. No electric guitars, please. Just kidding. But anyway, and it's by David. Some would say for David, and they'll say, la David. This was dedicated to David. It wasn't written by David. That is not wrong. That is wrong. We do know that la can have that sense of for someone. But in this case, it's what's called the lamed auctoris, or the lamed of authorship. And we know that two ways. Number one, we know that construction exists because we find it in the 3rd chapter of the book of Haggai. And, of Habakkuk. And Habakkuk wrote a psalm, and it says the psalm to Habakkuk. Well, he wrote it. He didn't, so it wasn't dedicated to him. It was a psalm written by him. But even more clearly, it is found in this psalm. Right off the bat, we're told that this is a psalm that was dedicated to David, what? Or it was written by David, I should say. Bavo Elau Natan Hanavi Ka'asher Ba El Bat Shava. When Nathan the prophet came unto him, when he went in, or had gone in, unto Bathsheba. So it says this is a psalm that's written about this. It says, this is not a psalm about, this is a psalm about David. No, this is a psalm for David. So David will, no, this is David telling his story. And the psalm is all first person, except for what he, from the standpoint of the psalmist. He talks about himself and the Lord. And those are the basic foci. But now let's get to the point I wanted to make. Take a look at the difference in verb forms. Chameni Elohim kachazdacha karov rachameha mecha machet Mache pasha. Pasha'ai. All right. Have mercy or show grace to me, because the knee on the end is a, if you want to, it's something on the order of grace me, you know. Show grace to me, God, according to your loyal love, your faithful love, according to the multitudes of your compassions, blot out my rebellions. Now you put all that together, you say, oh, I've got chaneni, that's an imperative. Mahe, that's an imperative. And you go, what's going on here? Now let's start off with something. It's an imperative. There are people, I remember listening to a preacher when I was, I think it was in college, who made the point, this was actually a major point in a sermon. It took about 10 or 15 minutes probing this, going from verse to verse to verse, and passage to passage to passage throughout the Old and New Testament, showing that when you are one of God's people, you have the right to order him around. You have the right to tell him what to do, and he has to help you. He has to do it. And the proof of that was all of these verbs were imperfects. I don't have to go any further than English to point out how ludicrous that is. I even knew it then, and I really liked this preacher, and I thought, well, you're nuts. This is not right. Actually, it's one of the first steps in me moving away from this guy, because his exegesis was clearly flawed. When we request things, we almost inevitably use the imperative in English. Pass me the peas, please. Pass, an imperative. May I come in? Sure. Sit down here. Sit down here. I'm giving you orders. But I'm not commanding in the sense that a general commands troops to go into battle or anything like that. I'm simply expressing my will for your behavior. The imperative is a way of expressing the author's or the speaker's desire for you, how you should act. And that's what we're going to find here, is that in Psalm 51, which is a psalm of prayer, just as most of us when we pray, try praying without using the imperative. Well, first of all, don't call it prayer, because you'll be so preoccupied with trying to avoid the imperative, you won't even be praying. You'll be thinking about your words. But listen to people pray, and notice how much of it is just imperative. Oh Lord, help me. Oh Lord, save my friend. Oh Lord, heal my mother. Oh Lord, give me peace. Prayer is almost always expressed in the imperative. And Psalm 51 is a prayer. It's David's prayer of repentance for the sin with Bathsheba. It's his confession. And as you read it, I want you to notice these imperatives. And as I said, don't interpret them as if they were somehow out of place. I've had students very uncomfortable with the idea that we can't talk to God in the imperative. And the answer is, of course we can, once we understand how the imperative works. It's when we oversimplify and say, oh, imperative means giving commands. And the answer is no. Imperative means expressing what I wish you to do, or to feel, or to think. You know, hey, calm down. I'm asking you to feel differently, to relax. Oh, there's no relax, man. Hey, pay attention, would you? Change your thinking. Change your focus. That's how the imperative works. It's natural. It's a very important part of language. And when we get to Psalm 51, we're going to see it. And what I want you to see is when we see verb forms change as you go through this psalm, it will be one of the ways we can mark the various phases in the development of David's thought. Now next week I will post, I'm tired tonight, so I won't do it tonight. But tomorrow I will post the helps for the translation of Psalm 51. And I will ask you, please, I won't ask you to turn anything in, but please translate at least the first 8 verses, which are, you will have gone through some logical units by that point. Better yet, 10 or 11, get about halfway through the Psalm, and do as much as you can without checking your English translation. Especially if your English translation that you're looking at is something like the NIV, and really even the ESV at times, in that they tend to smooth out the Hebrew, and as a result, there's a byproduct to that. They say, oh, it's much easier to read. Yes, but it's much easier to read because you are reading their interpretation of the passage. You aren't seeing what other options the Hebrew might have presented. Every once in a while you'll read the New King James Version or the New American Standard Version, and then you'll read the NIV and you'll say, what's the difference? And the answer is, one interpreted the passage one way, one interpreted another. Somehow or other in translation we always have to make decisions, interpretive decisions. And so it's good for you to, as much as possible, look at the Hebrew, and then you can make your own interpretive decisions, not letting some translating committee make those decisions for you. But I want you to watch these verb forms. All right. Have mercy upon me, O God, have mercy upon me, according to your loving kindness. Now we're going to have a textual variant here. Harev Kav Seni Me Awoni, and didn't review my Hebrew here, and this is hard to read practically because I don't like the context here, but anyway. Yeah, wash me here. Thoroughly wash me from my guilt or my iniquities. It's literally my guilt. And from my sins, notice the plural here. No, it's a singular actually, now I look at it. And from my sin, purge me. It's interesting, the 2 verbs for washing. One means to wash off, the other means to wash out. Clean me off, clean me out. It's very interesting, but that's for next time. But notice, again, imperatives. Wash me, purge me, cleanse me if you want. Show mercy to me. Blot out my transgression. Command after command after command. Now, in the law, God is constantly telling Israel what they should do. He's talking second person, most of the law is second person singular. Apodictic law, you shall not. Imperfect forms. In the Psalms, we have do this, don't do that. The point here is not that, there's some secret message that we're going to dig out by looking at finding these things. It's rather to notice that it's going to help us kind of figure out what is the function of these forms. Clearly, both of them are expressing the desire of the speaker for the behavior of the listener, how the listener should behave. And you say, okay, why is it in one place that he uses the imperfect, in the other place he uses the imperative? One thing we can see just off the top of our heads, if you're thinking about it, is in Exodus, whether we're talking about apodictic or as we've been looking at casuistic or case law. We're dealing with situations that are repeatable, that happen again and again and again, or variations of things that happen again and again. These are the kinds of things that happen, and these are the ways you should behave or respond when these sort of things happen. In Psalm 51, David isn't talking about things that happen. Now, there's no question David will have to confess other sins at other times. And when he praises, praise ye the Lord, he's calling for people to praise the Lord. He's going to want them to praise them again and again and again. But in each case, the use of the imperative says, I'm dealing with this particular situation right now. I'm not talking in general about have mercy upon me, O God. I'm not saying, Lord, I wish you'd be gracious to me. I'm saying, I'm really messed up. I've really done terrible things. Do something about my current situation. And that tells me something about the nature of prayer, at least in the Psalms. Since this is true throughout almost all of the prayer Psalms, the lament Psalms, and I posted a thing for you to read for next week, explaining the lament Psalms. You also have your textbook on the Psalms to help you, or the lament Psalms for you to help you see it. But I want you to see that one of the reasons for the difference in verb form is because prayer is about dealing with an immediate situation, not a generic one in the Psalms. Whereas the law is about dealing with generic situations. This is the way things happen in Paul and in the Psalms. This is what has happened to me, or what I want to happen at this moment in time, in this situation. And so we're going to see what is true in English in many cases, but in Hebrew particularly, we want to get the sense of these are things that the listener and maybe even the speaker don't consciously think about. They just say it or read it, but they feel it, and and their system is used to the language, so they spontaneously understand. You are now an exegete, and one of the first what's the word I want? Threats. One of the first consequences of negative consequences of being an exegete is you tend to, in your zeal to notice everything, you tend to miss these sort of things. I'm not saying you, but people like you tend to try to read too much into every form, and don't just go with the flow, as they say. And that's what's happening here. Let's see if I can move down to where we move away from the imperative. Now, he. This is very common in hortatory literature. And that's what Psalm 51 is. It's hortatory literature. It's me telling you, Lord, what I want you to do for me. And I'm going to tell you why you ought to do it. Because, and it's interesting, show me this mercy. Be gracious unto me. Blot out my transgressions. Why? Because my rebellion, I know. I realize that I've rebelled. And my sin is right in front of me, always. It's ever in front of me. Here, notice, this is a verbless clause. It says, this is my state at this moment. And same thing here. I know imperfect this. But this is the reason. This is why God should show me grace. But it's interesting. He calls out for grace and he says, why? Because I've really done wrong and I know it. And that's why I'm calling upon you to be gracious to me. He doesn't say, Lord, be gracious to me. I promise I'll always do better. And Lord, it wasn't that bad. He doesn't explain. He says, the reason I need your grace is the reason I'm calling for your grace is because I have nothing else but grace. There's nothing else but grace that can help me. Of course, you're familiar with verse 6. literally says to you, or woodenly. It's not really the right to say literally, but to you alone, I have sinned. Or we would, of course, say, against you alone have I sinned. And the evil in your sight I have done. And then we're going to have to deal with this next time. Lama'an. In order that, he says, you sinned in order that you might be just in your speech, in your words, and clear in your judgments. That is, cleared, maybe I should say, you're justified in your judgments. And you go, so I sinned so that you could have a good, clean case against me. Is that what David's saying? I don't believe so. But if I just take the word lama'an, which means in order that, then I'm going to be tempted to say that. David sinned so that God could get the glory of forgiving him. I can do that. I can commit a murder or a robbery or get hooked on drugs. I can do that and give God glory. That's not what he's saying. Boy, it'd be wonderful if we had time to talk about it. We'll have to wait till next time. So begin your translation of Psalm 51 and be looking for things like this. We want to notice how the words and grammar, and particularly the broader grammar, the broader context, the broader structure, how it all works together to make the message clear. We'll also talk about how what to do about parallelism. It's real easy to simply, well, I'll take a minute or two and I'll still let you out early. Commonly when we talk about parallelism, most of the textbooks and everything else will say, there's parallelism. And they'll give you a list of, the basic original ones were synonymous, antithetic, and what was the third? I don't remember. It's the one that everyone agrees is too general. And then they say, and then others have come up with dozens of, some have 100 different forms of else, and they all get involved in it. And then when the student starts doing his exegesis, his job is to identify the kind of parallelism. Yes, tell me, is this a synonymous parallelism, an antithetic parallelism, synthetic parallelism? That was the third. Which is it? What is it? And the student identifies it, and he thinks he's done. But I would argue that first of all, I'm not sure that those labels are valid or utterly accurate, and I have plenty of other friends of mine, or plenty of people I've read anyway, scholars who've worked on Hebrew poetry for decades who would agree. But I think the biggest thing is we're missing the whole point of exegesis. It's not to slap labels on things. It's to understand and be able to explain what's going on. So we know exactly what the passage is saying, and we see how it was developed, and that puts us in a position to be able to apply it appropriately and not foolishly. So that's what we'll look for next time. We're going to move on. Hang in there. Finish your translation of Exodus 21 and turn that in this week. And then start working. You don't have to turn it in, but start working on Psalm 51, and we'll go through at least half of it next week. That's a wonderful psalm. A lot of stuff to keep us occupied, a lot of stuff to think about, and incredibly rich in theology, and of course, as a psalm of confession, incredibly practical because we all sin. But that's next time. I'm letting you out 10 minutes early. I made you start 10 minutes late. I'm letting you out 10 minutes early. Don't tell anybody, okay? We'll see you next week.